The next grouping of tools in our toolbox I previously referred to as the layout and color tools. But when we look at the tools underneath the color picker, there's a variety of things there. And so I've decided that really these two together maybe should be renamed as a group of document tools. They're really about working with our document, our image. I'm going to start with the frame tool, which is isolated. There's nothing under it. And I thought, what better way to demonstrate the frame tool than with an image of a picture frame, this one by Dmitry Mashkin that I got off of Unsplash. And with the frame tool, we can create rectangular frames or elliptical frames. And so I'm just going to come over and draw a frame where the picture will go inside this picture frame. And it really becomes a placeholder. Now what this allows us to do then is to add a photo into this placeholder. So with that rocking horse there, I thought let's take this picture by Raphael Wicker of these horses. I'm just going to do a Control A to select all, or you can do the rectangular marquee and select everything. Control C to copy. I'm going to come back to the picture frame. Now on the layer you'll see there are two areas here. One is the frame itself and the other is the image that's going into the frame. So I'm just going to paste Control V, and there's the image of the horses inside that frame object that we created. I'm going to go to the Edit menu and choose Transform Scale. And I can grab the handle at the top and scale the picture down and move it kind of at the same time. And we'll grab this one at the bottom, scale it a little bit more. So you can see the dimensions of the image in relation to the frame. And then I can also just move it to where I want it. Press the Enter key, and there is our image inside of the picture frame. When we get to working on the unit with layers, we'll talk about clipping mask. And in essence, this is a quick way to do a rectangular or an elliptical clipping mask. Notice up on the options bar we can also do a elliptical frame, and again I could simply paste in the picture inside of that frame. I will delete that layer. That's the frame tool. Obviously we could have just pasted the horse image on top and removed the area we didn't want, and we get the same thing, but the frame tool makes a little faster process. Before we discuss the color picker tool, or what is probably more properly known as the eyedropper tool, let's take a look at the foreground and background color swatches that we have in our tools panel, just for a little context here. So we have two little squares here. The first one is our foreground color, the second one is our background color. And as we're working with color tools, we can specify to use whatever shade is in the foreground or background. By default, the foreground usually is black and the background is white. In fact, there's a little button here, a little black and white buttons, squares overlapping, that will take whatever colors are there and change that to black and white. The little two-headed arrow here allows me to swap those two. If I click on the foreground color, I get the color picker dialog, and by default I'm getting hue, saturation, and brightness, which is the model I like to work with in choosing colors. I have the hue spectrum here, so if I want a blue shade I can click on blue, and then for the saturation I'm going left to right, and the brightness is up and down. I can click on any shade and see the saturation and then the brightness. So 92% is the amount of brightness there. If I come down, it's going to be a much lower brightness. So I can choose a shade. Notice that wherever I click in this window, I'm getting the new shade up here compared to the current, and I'm going to click OK. And I have that blue. I can do the same thing with the background. I can click on the background color, and we want this to be maybe more of a magenta. And again, I can swap those two. So I'm going to go back to the black and white. That's some context of how we work with color. And the eyedropper tool allows me to select an individual pixel in my image for the foreground. So I'm going to come down and just click on the horse below its eye, and notice I get that color as my foreground. And if I want a different background color, maybe I want a green, I can swap those two, get my background as green, and then swap them. That's the eyedropper tool. Now, underneath that tool, there are several other tools working with documents. There's the 3D material eyedropper tool. I'm going to ignore that because the 3D abilities in Photoshop are being deprecated and will soon disappear. Adobe has their own 3D software they're developing called Adobe Substance. We've seen the eyedropper tool allows us to select an individual pixel from an image and set the foreground color to that same color. The color sampler tool is sort of along the same lines. It allows us to get an average of pixels around the pixel we click, but rather than put it to the foreground color, it puts it in our information. So I'm going to zoom in to a much greater extent so you can see the individual pixels. So again, if we go back to the eyedropper tool, we're clicking on an individual pixel and setting the foreground color to that color. But with the color sampler tool on the options bar, we can still do a point sample, but we can also do a 3x3 average or a 5x5 average. So I'm going to do the 5x5 average, and we'll come in and click on a pixel here. So it's looking at the 5x5 pixels around that, and it's putting in the information the average of those as far as the red, green, blue. And I could then click on another color. I'm going to zoom back out, and I'm going to zoom in here on the greens. And let's take the color sampler tool again and click on a green area. And notice that in the image is putting a little circle here with the 1. I'm going to zoom back out again. You'll see the one for the 2. So there's my 1 down here. There's my 2 up here. And we see red, green, blue values for each of those. Now, how would we use that? Well, we might use that in terms of setting up a color theme. We want to pull from these colors to create a color theme maybe for another document, another image. We can also use these as points when we're working with adjustments in trying to find maybe the highlight and the shadow of each document and maybe a mid-tone gray. So we can mark those as we work with different tools that's the points we want to sample from. If I later come back and say, okay, I want to get that green, I can come in and click in that area and get that green color. Now that's again going to be a point sample and not the average. So you know it's a little bit different. If I wanted the average sample for that green, I can simply type in 55, 142, and 37. And now I have that average green of that 5x5 pixel area that I clicked on. And if you want to see the color information in a different color mode besides RGB, you can right click on the little eyedropper and choose, say, hue, saturation, brightness, or maybe this one I want to see as CMYK. Further underneath the eyedropper tool is the ruler tool, the note tool, and the count tool. The ruler tool allows me to come along and click at one point and drag to another point and see then in the information how many pixels that is. Or if I'm working with inches, how many inches that would be. This might be useful for designing a montage and knowing how much size you need. There's also an angle here. I drew pretty much a straight line, so it's 0.1 degrees. Now, I have to admit, I don't think I've ever used the ruler for that purpose to measure. There is another cool feature to the ruler tool. I'm going to jump over to this image. Our fence back here is not level with the horizon. So here's a cool thing you can do with the ruler tool. I can take the ruler and drag along the line of that fence. And then on the options bar, there's a button to straighten the layer. And so I can use that ruler tool as my new horizon. Boom. That's pretty cool. Now, I'm getting some areas on the corners that don't quite match up with that new angle, so I probably need to crop it. Or I could try to fill in these areas using Content Aware. But that now looks much better. The Note tool allows us to place notes on an image. This is great for collaboration, working with another designer or an editor. So the editor might come in and put a note, and we have this little pop-up for notes that comes up, and the editor might say, can we replace the sky? Or we might put notes in here in terms of maybe some of the metadata where this was taken, copyright information, maybe the source of this image, if we grab this online somewhere. The notes do not print, they do not show up if we export this, they're only in the Photoshop document, the PSD file. And so what happened coming back, so you can double click on the note icon and see the notes that were left. Notice on the options bar you can also color code the notes. So maybe different people working on this image would have different colors. Or you can use different colors to mean different things, different types of notes. To get rid of a note, you can right click on it and choose Delete Note. The Count tool allows me to count objects on the screen and place a marker. Now we can do the marker color up here, so I'm going to make mine maybe a little more of a bright magenta. We can also choose the marker size and the label size. I'm going to set the marker size up to, let's say, 10, so you can see this. The label size I'll make 20. And I'm going to click on each puppy. There's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now these puppies are all in a straight line. It's pretty easy to count them, but maybe they're not in a straight line. Maybe they're all over the place. So I want to make sure that as I'm counting something that I don't mark one twice or miss one. That's where the Count tool comes in. I've heard of trial attorneys using the Count tool to mark up evidence presented in a court case. So those are our document tools. We saw the Frame tool, the Eyedropper tool, Color Sampler tool, Ruler tool, Note tool, and Count tool. Again, I don't use those very often, but you might find those helpful for your purposes. If you'd like to see more videos in the Photoshop Practicum playlist, click the title at the bottom. If you'd like to be alerted to new videos, please click my photo in the top right to subscribe to the channel.